Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to Miss Kelly. Thank you for coming on.
Good morning.
Um, so, today we're hearing a story from Kelly about her testimony of how Jesus Christ saved her life. Um, we'll go ahead and get us prayed in, and I'll give you the mic.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for my friend Kelly. Thank you for giving her the courage to come on and share her experience, strength, and hope with others, that they may find hope, Lord, and come to you, Lord. Lord, we can't do it without you. We don't want to. So it's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let me start with some announcements. So this Saturday, everybody knows we have uh, BYO Church, same BYO time, 6 p.m., 3253 South 4th Street. Come a little early. Come and fellowship with somebody. If you're new, we're there at 4 o'clock practicing for our praise team is practicing. So come and listen. Also, we're still doing the coat drive, I believe. If you got a warm coat, hat, gloves, bring it to us. We got a box, we put it in, and we will get it out to whoever needs it. Also, something new, we have a bingo night coming up Friday, January 16th, 6 to 9 p.m., and that's to raise funds for the women's ministry. If you haven't noticed, we have a lot of very strong women in our congregation. So come join us for that. And also Monday through Friday, Monday through Sunday actually, but Monday through Friday, our live shows, 7:30 a.m. Saturday. We're always looking for people to give their testimony. So if you want to give your testimony, give me or Robert a call. Sunday 9 a.m. with Sissy and Sarah, and then Sunday night with Danny. All righty. So there we are. Hi, Kelly.
Hello.
So this is Kelly. Kelly was introduced to me by Danielle and referred to us to give her testimony. So we appreciate it, Danny, for inviting Kelly on. So Kelly, go ahead with your story.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I want to start by saying I'm going to try to keep this relatively short, but I am definitely a wordy person, so please forgive me if I tend to fall off course. I want to start by saying, first and foremost, that the life I live today is, in my mind, something that never existed in when I refer to the life that I'm about to share with you. Undoubtedly, I had no idea of the potential and possibility, and there's one bottom line reason for that, which I will get to. I am Kelly Pitchford, as Craig announced, and I am a person who is someone that struggled with mental health. I'm also someone who is an addict in recovery. I will celebrate 14 years in March. And with that
Yay.
said, thank you. With that said, every day leading up to the moment that initially what I would call rock bottom, but today I call my miracle, was a life that was unrecognizable in comparison to the life I live today. I was born to parents that, of course, while unknowing, because I was a child and you're not supposed to know and understand these things, I did learn at a relatively young age that my parents were drug addicts. They were not together. In my earliest memory, I remember seeing them together just periodically, but it was a very toxic situation. There was a lot of fighting and whatnot. Um, Both of them being drug addicts might make you, envision the life that maybe they were leading. But the truth of the matter is my birth father's parents, there were a lot of medical field. My birth father's parents, whom, by the way, I knew all the way up to his death, which was just a few years ago. But His mother was a nurse. His dad was a physical therapist. He came from a big Catholic family. He was the black sheep of the family, but he went to Vietnam and came back a different person. He was definitely somebody that was affected throughout the entirety of his life by Vietnam, but I do believe he probably had some issues prior to going. My birth mother was an RN. She was the head nurse on her floor at the time. She was very intelligent, very beautiful. And her mother was a nurse, a lot of medical field. I think that there was a lot of abuse in her family in hindsight. I didn't know that in the moment until now. I never knew the grandfather, her father, but anytime he would come up, there was just a hush in the room because of the abuse. Now, I don't know what kind of abuse, but I can only imagine. So, being born to these parents in this toxic environment, in this disruptive situation, turned into something that's really unimaginable for me to even speak as a mother. Um, with that said, I know that there was definitely mental health aspects involved and addiction to the fullest extent. My mother, being an RN, would start stealing her meds from her patients. Um, she would very quickly turn to a IV drug user. And when she was caught by the hospital, it's because she had uh, used in the bathroom intravenously, had, I guess, used too much, passed out, and they had to remove the door from the hinges in order to find her. Because she lost her income, she very quickly figured out a way, I assume, to still maintain her addiction. And unfortunately, I was the collateral damage in that situation. I don't want to forget to mention that I did have a little brother. He was 18 months younger than I was, and I did a lot of momming at a very young age. She definitely favored him in a lot of ways, and I took a lot of the moments that she was out of control physically. And somewhere along the lines, when she was a nurse, she met somebody who would, this is going to be confusing, but down the road, end up being my sister. Now, it was a friend of hers. She was a clerk at the hospital. They would party together, but the friend's family would babysit us. That's very important. And they would babysit us so often that we actually called the friend's mom, and we called our mommy, our birth mother, mommy. So there was mom and mommy, and there was dad and daddy. And because the family of the friend who would babysit us had us often enough that we felt comfortable enough to call them mom and dad. With that said, my brother would live with this family long before I would, and I would find out why many years later when a repressed memory would present itself. I have a dog. I'm so sorry. Of course, she's going to do this right now. But with all of that said, what my mother figured out that she could do, and I don't know how, I want to say in her right mind, which clearly she wasn't, you could come to this conclusion, but she met a group of people, the worst kinds of human beings you can imagine, that were men, and in order to obtain and continue to use, she would trade me for exchange of her drug of choice. I remember going to the airport and picking up men with her. She would introduce them to me as if they were a gift. And I was young and knew something was wrong. I didn't like it, but I wasn't old enough to understand just how wrong it was. So, of course, I said nothing. And I was very, very young when all of this started. In these moments, my brother was already living with this family. And I would go out there occasionally, having lots of opportunity, of course, to say something, but I never did. I remember being young enough and sitting in this house where I had been dropped off at, and sitting on the couch, staring at the phone, just praying she would call or come and get me, and asking, when's my mommy going to come and get me? And the man would say, I don't know. So I remember being there for days on end at times, and there were so many different in my memories, and I don't try to remember the specifics of these things, of course, but I remember a group of 5 or 6 different men. With all of that said, um, at some point in time, and I don't know the answer to this, I don't know how it actually occurred, but I uh, remember starting school in the last home that we lived in this particular town. I remember being left at school for periods of time to where, even as a kindergartner, I knew what the teacher was saying when she said, if you're late tomorrow, she can't come back. Um, Obviously, she was not fit to be a mother, and obviously, there was a lot of neglect and abuse, and obviously, there were things going on that just should never happen to a child. One day, I remember her rushing me to get in the car, and I noticed as we got in the car that there was stuff all around me, but I had no idea what was happening. She brought me to the Verdon police station, and she walked me in, and she got me a soda out of the soda machine, and she kissed me on the forehead, and she said, I'll be right back, and she never came back. So I was left there that day, and I went to live with the family here in Verdon that were babysitters to us, where my brother already was. Her mother, my birth mother's mother, was my favorite person on earth, and she had been living with cancer even while I was still there. And I just kept thinking she was going to come and get me. She'll come and get me. She'll come and save me. But it was probably a month after I was there. The mom, who would eventually be my mom, and I'll get to that, sat me on her lap and told me that she had passed away. So I knew I was there, and I didn't know what was going to happen, but I did know that we just needed to figure out a way to live. And the family undoubtedly saved our lives. I want to say that. I don't want to say anything that's going to be disrespectful or dishonoring of this family, but I do want to say that as a small child, I was treated very differently than I was as an older individual. I mean, preteen, teen, everything very much so changed. With that said, to be a boy in the family was favored over being a girl. And when I say I became a tomboy or a version of a boy, I went to the barber for a haircut. I wore boys' clothes. I played on the boys' sports teams. All of this leading up to my preteen years. And at the time that I had moved in, the father of the family, who clearly maintained, uh, I guess, some normalcy in the family, was very sick. He was already dying of congestive heart failure and emphysema. And so he was very crabby and grouchy, sick a lot. We spent a lot of time at the hospitals. And with all of that said, the way we discipline our children today versus back then is very different, and his discipline was very physical. I don't want to say that he was abusive, but he definitely crossed the line a few times, and it created a rift between me trusting him and me trusting them, because I was always kind of sort of the black sheep. Stephen was very loved, and that was my brother, very loved, and we did manage to very much stick together. But once the adoption proceedings started, and to get started with this, I'll say that I have been told now, and I don't know where the truth in this lies, because there have been so many lies told over the years, that my birth mother was given an option to attend treatment. And if she was to attend treatment and get help, then she was under the impression she was going to get us back. But when she was released, they wouldn't give us back. Now, with that said, a fight started, and it went to the courts. And we were in court on a monthly basis. 6 years. It seemed almost every month. And with that said, there were moments that I would have to watch them carry her into the court because she was so incapacitated due to her drug use. There were moments, just one moment specifically, that I remember her coming to the house with her lawyer, and a fight breaking out between her and the family. And as she left, she whispered in my ear, make sure you choose me, choose me, choose me. So much just pressure and toxic and fear of disappointing was creating this characteristic of me. And I immediately enveloped like all of the characteristics of an overachiever. I did not want to make anybody unhappy. I was a chameleon. I could be anybody wanted me to be, as long as they were happy with me, not angry with me, weren't harming me, and would maybe show me a little bit of love,
Right.
because I felt very unloved as I started to age. Um, I was compared to my birth mother a lot. Anytime the family would be mad at me, and when I say the family, the mom and dad, the mom was 50 years older than me to the day, so much older than us, and would definitely be our grandparents in a normal scenario, but they were our parents. And they had 6 girls and 3 boys of their own. The youngest of all of those girls were twin girls, and they were 28. So we're talking like 23 years older than us. They all still lived at home except for one or two. One of them had lived in another state. Another one lived in town, but she was out there every day. It was definitely it was an odd situation in hindsight, but I didn't know that as a child. None of them dated. None of them had boyfriends. The men weren't there. They had gone out and started their lives and families, but all of the women were. And they all lived at home well into their 30s. Some of them into their 40s. And as I grew older, there was conflict. It seemed like the more I did and the more I achieved, the more they hated me, which is, of course, counteractive to everything I was hoping for. And up front and center, my mother was at every ball game. I became, like I stated, the overachiever. I was a great student. I was never in any trouble. I was a cheerleader. I even cheered professionally right out of high school. I was an All-American athlete. I was an all-conference catcher. I was a trackster. Everything there was to do, I did. And everything I did perfectly, because doing it imperfectly was not an option. She was up front and center with a smile on her face, and she was, for a lack of better term, the little old lady that everybody loved. But there was a side of her that no one saw, that I knew. And in speaking to the closest people in my lives who were my friends, even at first they didn't believe me, but they'd started to see some things. And that's when they started calling me Cinderella. Being compared to my birth mother in those years, you're just like her. And they call me by her first name. At one point, it was so mentally taxing on me that I collapsed. And in these moments, I was approaching, I think, my junior year of high school. I, like I said, had done everything I knew to do. I was the homecoming queen. I was the class president. I really did try to be the best person I could. But the truth of the matter is I was a deeply wounded and deeply scarred individual with a great big smile on my face, exuding this happy life that I had no idea what it meant. I mean, I was the farthest thing from happy. I was the farthest thing from confident. I was one of the most insecure people you would ever know. Walking into a room of people in school used to take my breath away. but I would perform on the floor as a gymnast. I had no problem performing as a dancer, as a cheerleader. Anytime I was performing, it's like I take myself to another world. So people thought something very different of the life that I must be living, because I never, ever let anybody in on what was actually occurring. When I collapsed at this point, I had started having dreams, because I had never mentioned any of what occurred leading up to the moments of being dropped off at the police station that day. And I came to the realization that I had always known, it was always in my mind, what I had experienced all those years with those men. But it's like it wasn't real. I had detached entirely emotionally from the pain that surrounds those types of abuses. And with saying I always knew, and it not being real in my mind or in my psyche to be able to feel, at some point in time, my mind was too full, and it just started to escape the little box that I had packed it away in, burst through dreams. Um, as I started having these dreams, I started struggling, and I wasn't sharing it with anybody. But of course, in a small town back in the day, what you did on the weekends was you drank and you drove around like idiots.
Yeah.
And I came home after drinking one night, and my mom being older than I was, to the point that she was also very, very, I don't want to say protective, but controlling first and foremost. If I was a minute late for curfew, she'd call the police. The police got so tired of her calling them that they'd pull me over and say, "Your mom called again." I'm like, "I'm on my way home." I mean, it was so ridiculous. But the truth of the matter is, she did it all the time. In this particular moment, I said it for the first time. I said, "Did you know?" Because we were fighting. And of course, all of her daughters came to her rescue, and it was nothing for them to pile on top of me and fight and beat me. And they were much larger than I was. And with that said, I decided to run away. It was not the first time I had ran away, and we lived about 4.5 miles out of town. And typically they would meet me at the tracks. They'd let me get all the way into town, like with the dogs chasing me, and I'd lay in the ditches when the loud cars would come by. I was terrified, but they'd let me get all the way into town, and then they'd pick me up at the door, like, "Get in." She didn't pick me up this night. So I went on to my best friend's house, and I had a conversation with her mother, my best friend's mother, and I said, "I just can't take it anymore." And unbeknownst to me, more people knew what was happening than I was aware of. And so, of course, she said, "You're welcome to stay here." Well, of course, that was not going to be acceptable with this woman. And instead of allowing me to stay, she had the police come and get me. She started spreading rumors about this girl's mom. Um, it, when you think about a little old lady, think about a little old lady who's like a witch in the background, because she was constantly stirring the pot. She was very, very manipulative. She even had our pastor convinced that I was this evil thing. But with all of that said, I had a choice that night to go home or to go to a foster home. And I chose the foster home because I could not go back. In those moments, I had a plan to become emancipated. And obviously, you have a caseworker that's doing everything they can to get you home at the time. So they would schedule these visits. Something I haven't mentioned is the house was always filthy. When I say filthy, it was filthy. My room was immaculate. I developed this OCD tendencies thing because of the filth that I lived in. The first thing they would do, of course, would be to destroy my room. I would come home from being somewhere. All of my shelves had been wiped clean, my homecoming crown smashed in the ground, spaghetti thrown all over my rooms. We're talking about 35-year-old women doing this to me. But they did it all the time. And so I would just clean up, and it got to the point, it was so routine. I would get up, I would get myself ready, I would leave for school, I would go to whatever sports practice I had after the fact. I would make sure I was home by curfew, and I would walk straight to my room, shut the door, and sleep. That is all I did in that home. But they still found ways to create this atmosphere. I remember my mother coming to my room one day and she was arguing with me about something. And I sassed her. Of course, I was a teenager. Of course, I sassed her. And she held her hand up and she slapped her hand and she said, "Don't hit me." And
Mm.
so, of course, they all piled on top of me again. And you can see why I broke eventually. It's just so much for somebody to take, yet still exude this carefree, happy. It's so hard to hold on to that. But I thought I could do it forever. So I decided to go to this foster home and they're trying to reunite me. And I come into the home for these meetings and it was clean. And I'm like, it's never like this. And there's like, she's lying. And it was just always a show, a production, you name it, whatever. My dad in that family had passed away when I was 13 years old. And from the moment he died, everything went from different to insanity. It was pure insane. The mother of this family wasn't just bad to me, she was bad to her other daughters as well. One of her daughters had cancer. She stole all of her money while she was hospitalized after having a
Wow.
tumor removed. I mean, but in the public eye, she was a good woman. And
Mm.
so, who am I to try to convince anybody? And I didn't care. I didn't trust anybody in those moments of my life. I ended up coming home from that foster home before becoming emancipated for a cheerleading competition. Cheerleading was something that was very important to me. We were a competitive squad. We were very good. We traveled all over the world. I did make a career of it for a minute. But the fact of the matter is we were approaching one of our biggest competitions of the year and I couldn't miss it. So I caved and came back to the house until I turned 18. I need to start also by saying, or I need to also include that in these moments of time while I was in high school, all I knew was toxic. All I knew was abuse. All I knew was emotional abuse. So, of course, any kind of relationship I was seeking out was all of those things. It was my normal. It is all that I knew. And I can tell you, if you are not aware, I will be the first. We as the sick, and when I say sick, I'm talking mental health, I'm talking addiction, I'm talking whatever it is that's holding you back from your ultimate happiness, attract the sick. And there is a truth to what they say about the abusive being able to pick us out of a crowd. Uh, I don't remember a relationship that I had that wasn't abusive leading up to just a few years ago. And when I say abusive, in those moments of high school, it was primarily just emotional abuse and cheating and, disregard. But of course, when you're in high school and you think you're in love, your whole world falls apart.
Mm.
For me, I would put everything into a relationship because I had no home life. And so it was just absolutely devastating to me when something like that would happen. About the time I turned 18, I decided to really rebel and I decided to start dating the one person no one in their right mind in this town would date. And it's because we all knew he was bad. We all knew this particular person was abusive. He had been in trouble with the law more times than I can count. He had dropped out of school. He was just not the type of person. As a mother, I would say it's okay, go date him. But he was on my list, and I think it was a rebellious type of thing. And of course, I always thought I was going to be the exception because what happens a lot of times when you're seeking out this destructive and toxic, because it's all you know, in the first moments of that relationship, they will love you like no one has ever loved you in your life. And I don't know if it has something to do with the fact that they never thought in a million years that like you would date them or if it's part of their plot and plan. But the moment they figure out they have you is when the real destructive starts occurring. And when I tell you I was abused physically in a way it's unfathomable to process. I was abused emotionally. I had a weapon stuck in my mouth. I watched him kill animals. I was cheated on constantly. It was just so absolutely toxic and abusive. And the only thing I knew to do was to beg him to stay with me. When you are broken in your mind, you have no idea that you are worth so much more. And the only thing I feared more than just losing him was being alone. And so the worse he was, the more I clung, to the point that I'm really lucky to be here. And there's so much truth to that. And when I go on to tell you what occurred next, I want to just kind of issue a little bit of a trigger warning, because there are some hard things I have to say. But I ended up getting pregnant, and I had my child. And oh Lord, he is the little creature that I call my hero, because he saved my life.
Amen.
There were moments in the coming days. He was maybe 3 years old or 3 days old. I had to have a home nurse because the labor was very hard. Um, and with that said, she would just come and visit and such for a few days. But with that said, Kyle was 3 days old when this man held me up against the wall by my throat, strangling me as I was trying to hold on to him. Um, Punched me in the face, and I still managed to hold on to him. And it was maybe a week or two later, the DEA was at our house, and they were searching our cupboards because he had been selling drugs out of the back laundry room. By the grace of God, he convinced them, and I don't know that this was a God thing or not, but I'm just going to say, with regard to me and my child, um, he from the police car had convinced them that he had thrown his, it was a little box that he kept some of his smoke in and such, and he had thrown it somewhere, and he told them that's all there was, and he told them where it was, and they left without searching the drawer that it was in. I don't know why, but I was so scared to death, and knowing that it was in that drawer and that they hadn't picked it up, I put it in a diaper bag and I took it to one of his friends' house, because I was like, I don't want this anywhere near us. I could have just lost my child. I did not use drugs. I was absolutely anti-drug. I drank, but I did not use any form of drugs. And all through high school, same thing. Um, I think maybe I had experimented a couple of times, and I'm talking in the most minuscule way experimentation. But with that said, not a drug user in these moments of my life. When he got released, when he was released, he came home and beat the ever living life out of me because I had transported those drugs somewhere else in order to keep our child safe. And it was a week later I came home, and he had moved everything out of the house, furniture, baby bed, you name it, and left me there with this child. So I ended up having to move in with his mother. And I'm not going to say a lot about that, but I'm going to tell you, you want to talk about putting yourself in a worse situation. It was the worst of the worst of the worst types of situations. So we're broken up in these moments, and of course we find a way back together. And that was short lived, because I'm starting to feel a certain way, and I'm working a good job, and I'm meeting other people. So I do eventually manage to sneak away. I had tried to leave him multiple times in this moment in time, and he would beat me and he would destroy all of my things. So one morning I got up and I pretended like I was going to work. And he, of course, thought I was going to work. So he left for work, and I called my girlfriend and I said, today's the day. We took everything we could put in her husband's truck, and I hid out in her home until he figured out where I was. This is when the stalking started. And when I say stalking, we're talking about the type of stalking you would see on TV or read in a scary book, or watch on a horror film. Um, I would be anywhere and know he was watching me. I would in town be somewhere and see the dog that we had walking up the alley. So I knew he was somewhere watching me from afar. I eventually started dating somebody, and for the first time in my life, he was a good person. He was a good guy. He was a prison guard. He had his college degree. He treated me like a princess. He was good to my child. And I got my own place. And while this particular person lived a good distance away, over an hour away from me, we would get together as often as we could and just hang out or go out on dates and such. But he was very good to me. Well, the stalking had continued, and it had gotten so much worse that when I moved into my own place, I had to have my phone number changed because he would call me and tell me that he had hired people to take my life. Um, he would call while on a cell phone, and this was before we all had cell phones. So he had one of those car boxy cell phones, and he would be outside my window talking, and who's there, like if I had friends over, if any of them were of the opposite sex. The moment we would walk outside to go somewhere or for them to leave, he would attack them. I called the
Wow.
police over and over and over again. I tried to get a restraining order, but without a police report, because he would run and the police would not pursue him. And at the point that he had laid his hands on another one of my friends, I said, "At what point can I get some help here?" And I got yelled at by the police officer. "What do you want us to do?" So I gave up on that. All in all, I'm hanging out with friends. I'm establishing this life. I've got this good, this good man in my life at this point, but I'm still just 23 years old and young and trying to do the mom thing, and I'm working two full-time jobs. And with that said, um, when he found out that I was dating somebody seriously, the stalking really picked up. It would be so bad that when my boyfriend would come to visit, we would have to park his car down the road at the dealership because he would vandalize it every time it was in the driveway.
Wow.
If he was present, we would have to make sure we were safe walking out of the house. Now, my boyfriend was not afraid of him. He was 6'5". He was a bodybuilder. He was this great, big, healthy guy. But I was fearful because I knew what he was capable of. I did not, however, know that he was capable of what he would do. And this is where, again, I have to issue a warning. After about a year of being stalked relentlessly, he disappeared for a minute. And it was such a time that his mother had even contacted me telling me she was worried about him. And I said, "I don't know where he's at. I don't want anything to do with them." And she was fearful that maybe he'd run off the road somewhere and was in some pond or whatever. The night that he resurfaced, my boyfriend was over. We had parked his car at the dealership. It was an unplanned visit. It was just a night that he happened to have off. Um, we had watched some TV. The baby was asleep in his crib, and we had gone to bed. And at 1:09 in the morning, I heard a pounding on the door, and it was the back door. And I got up and looked at the stove light or stove clock and noticed that it was late. And so I kind of creeped to the door and held the curtain to the side. And as I held the curtain to the side, I saw his face, but he was looking towards the highway. I lived on the highway. And I let the curtain drop, not thinking he saw me, but I went back to the bedroom and I said, "It's so and so. I'm not dealing with that tonight. I'm not going to let him in." And so I got back into bed. And about the moment that I'm crawling back into bed, I heard a crack and a crunch, and he had broken into my home.
Wow.
I immediately ran back from my bedroom to the kitchen because he's standing in the foyer, which was right off the kitchen where my bedroom was off of as well. And I was like, "What are you doing here?" Now I'm in a t-shirt and underwear, mind you, but the fact of the matter is it's in the middle of the night. I'm like, "You need to leave. You need to get out of my house. I'm going to call the police." And he kept reaching for his back pocket and saying, "I just want to give you some money." And I'm like, "Money? You have never given me money. Just leave this house." I said, "I can smell you from here. I could smell the booze." I knew he was drunk, but I just thought he was there to probably fight my boyfriend. In those moments, he did start saying, "Is your boyfriend here? Is your boyfriend here?" And I said, "You just need to leave." Well, about that moment, my boyfriend started to become concerned for me. And he came out of the bedroom and he stood behind me at kind of an angle. And it was in that moment that my ex, the stalker, reached for his back pocket again and he pulled out a gun and he rested the gun on my shoulder and he fired. And when
Wow.
he fired, my boyfriend was struck, and I did not know it at the time, but he was struck in the throat. All I knew was that that had just happened. And it was a moment I can't put my words together to describe, but it was so shocking. And I was in such disbelief. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was going to die. I didn't know if I should be fearful. I just didn't know. So I was like, "What are you doing?" And I didn't again know that my boyfriend had been hit. I just knew he was gone. Like he was nowhere. And so I immediately start grabbing the arm of the stalker and I'm trying to pull it down because he keeps trying to pull it up and he's facing the door where my boyfriend had retreated. And now my boyfriend, like I said, had been hit in the throat in these moments, which I didn't know at the time, but he's holding the door shut because it was an old house. The latches had been painted, so there's no latch on the door, there's no lock on the door. So he's holding the door shut as this stalker is throwing himself up against the door, trying to get through it. I am fighting the stalker and wrapping my arm in the sleeve of his coat. We had a puppy. The puppy had freaked out and left, but there's a water bowl that had spilled all over the floor. And when I tell you, we were slipping and falling. I was wrapping my arm in his sleeve and we were falling down on the ground. And every time he'd stand up, he'd beat me all the way up, kicking me, beating me, just doing everything he could to get away. Well, that went on, and at some point he decided enough's enough and he put the gun against my forehead and he asked me if I wanted to die. And when I said no, he pistol whipped me. And it knocked me for a loop to the point that I couldn't move. My arms and legs were just like cement blocks. And I could not get up to stop him. So he goes back to the door and he's throwing himself and he's kicking himself. And when he can't get through, he stands back and he starts firing through the door. And in
Wow.
those moments, my boyfriend was hit repeatedly and he fell to the bed. And it was in that moment that I watched him go in and stand directly over the top of him. He placed the gun on the back of his head and he pulled the trigger. So after that, he followed me and chased me as I looked for the phone. And in those moments, the realization that my baby was in the house came to my mind. And I had to stop and face him instead of running from him and say, "You're going to have to kill me because I'm not going to let you get to the baby." And he said, "I don't want to hurt the baby." It was just so, this like moment of, he had so many opportunities to turn around and go away all through this thing. But in that particular moment, he's like, "What do I do? Do I shoot myself? What do I do?" And I said, "I don't know." But he kept taking the phone away from me. Um, I finally got the phone in my hand, and the only thing I could think to do was to tell him to run because he wouldn't leave. And I didn't know what to do. I said, "Just run." And in those moments, I called 911. I ran to the neighbor's house. I realized my baby's still in the house. I ran back. I didn't know where he was, but I did not see him again until he, we were put in the hospital under alias names for 48 hours. And my boyfriend actually survived that
Wow.
because he used target bullets instead of regular bullets, but not without life change. He was
Mhm.
testing to be a state police officer. The bullet passed through his cerebellum. His fine motor skills were affected, so his career was over. His peripherals are blind. He has brain damage. He had ended up being shot in the neck, in the chest, in the back of the head. But he did pull through. And for months, we were in the hospital. And the day that they actually did catch him, I had to leave the hospital to go to the state's attorney's office. And I realized in these moments how scared I was to do anything. I couldn't drive. I couldn't walk. I couldn't do anything without thinking somebody was going to kill me. And I mean, I'm talking about being on the interstate and a car driving up next to me. and feeling like they were going to harm me. And it was a very real, even though unrealistic, but real fear that paralyzed me. So, moving on to the next chapter of my life, a couple of months later, he was incarcerated, but my brother, who was 18 months younger than I was, and I haven't talked a lot about him because I can't, it's very hard for me. He was my best friend, and he was the only family I had outside of my child. I had been adopted into this family, but you've heard, and his life was taken. And so they basically lured him to a place with a friend, and they tortured him. And then they put him and the friend in a car, and they were unresponsive, and an Amtrak train hit their car. The shooting occurred in March. My brother's life was taken in August. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to function without my child. I definitely would not have stayed here. But when I tell you in those moments that something inside of me broke, something inside of me changed. And I was so mad at God. For the first time in my life, I doubted him.
Doing great. Hang in there.
I never really doubted him, but I didn't know Christianity to this level that I do today. I had gone to a Catholic preschool with my birth mother. I had been in church my whole life with the family that adopted us. And I always believed in God, but I didn't really know what believing meant. I knew the teachings, and I knew we celebrated him Easter and Christmas, but he was never in the forefront of my mind. I was a kid just trying to live, right? I prayed a lot. I watched a miracle occur when my boyfriend lived. And when my brother died, I did not know how I was going to survive. I still sometimes don't. But in those moments, for the first time in my life, I was so fearful of the what ifs. It's like faith, I just couldn't comprehend faith because you don't have proof. And
Right.
what if he's just not anywhere? Like it just killed me. I also could not believe that a God could allow something like this to happen after all I had been through. And I very much became a victim. I was so lost and so broken, but I still kept going. I'm still pretty broken from him, but I found a way to live. I think a lot about what he must have been through. And I'd taken care of him my whole life until we got a little bit older and he had taken care of me. He kind of took on the big brother role, but he was our family and we loved him. And we didn't know it was a murder at first because they staged it. But it was just a couple of days after the fact when the words were spit out by the other family in a meeting with the state police. And I immediately released it. Like, no, this is just emotion. There's no way that's what happened. There's no way. In this meeting, it was called because there were so many questions and 2 young boys died that day. And the rumor mill was insane. And initially they wanted to blame alcohol because both the boys did have alcohol in their system. There was alcohol in the car. And if you knew my brother was an alcoholic. I have no doubt now. In those moments, he had just been 21 for 10 days, but he had already had DUIs. He drank a lot. I know why he drank a lot now. We had both lived through something people don't live through, but we never spoke about it. We just knew.
Mhm.
Both just knew. But the fact of the matter is, a year later, after the rumor mill had just gone crazy, and every time I would be anywhere, people would approach me and address me and tell me their theory or their version. And I broke a little bit more every single time. But I just kept maintaining this strength and this smile and this I have to move forward. I was called by a detective, and the detective called me in for questioning, telling me even I was a suspect until he ruled me out. And long story short, he had three theories. Two of them were just so insane. They wanted me to believe that he was flying back and forth to California every 2 days. I said, "Do you realize he lives with my mom and she's like nuts?" I mean, he had gone off to the Navy and come home. I said, "There's no way she's going to miss him." I said, "He's not been to California. Trust me, he doesn't have the money, he doesn't have the means, and she'd have the FBI looking for him if that was the case." But the fact of the matter is, the third theory is the one that I'd always been super fearful of. And I don't know if his words confirmed it because there's never been an arrest, but we all know who did it. But he said that the stalker's best friend was the ringleader.
Hmm.
And I knew that. Allegedly, they were lured in and it wasn't supposed to end up being what it was, but it went too far, and they had to do it right. There were parents involved, and nobody has been arrested to this day. Yet we all know. So with that, and with that guilt, I broke a little bit further. It was soon that I met my husband, and we started. My husband was actually a friend of the stalkers, which ironically, they couldn't be more night and day. But with all of that said, I got married. The marriage wasn't, we were too young, obviously. I was too broken. And long story short, we started trying to have, well, we actually got pregnant accidentally, and I would lose my child into the third trimester. I was going into my third trimester. So after that, a little bit more broken. We tried again. I got pregnant. We miscarried. After that, I got pregnant with my son George, who I was in the hospital 7 of my 9 months. My kidneys started to fail. And I had in this period of time with these losses and these health issues and pregnancies and all of the things, I had about 6 surgeries in 2 years, with them trying to figure out what was going on, why I was experiencing certain pain, certain losses, hemorrhaging, things like that. And they'd introduced me to pain medication. And I had zero interest in it. No problem with it whatsoever. I'd have surgery. My husband would disperse or dispense a pill to me. I would go to sleep. Maybe that would take a couple of days for my recovery. He'd put him in the cabinet. And that was it. Like, I didn't have any interest. I was not feeling addiction tendencies or anything. For whatever reason, after my son was born, he was born healthy. It was a really tough road. A couple of years later, my daughter was born, another really tough pregnancy. I did experience postpartum depression on top of all of the unaddressed trauma, which I was probably in one of the darkest places I've ever been in my life. I went to the medicine cabinet to obtain a ibuprofen, but instead of taking an ibuprofen, I took a Furoset, which was something they had prescribed me while I was pregnant with my daughter for migraine syndrome. That Furoset is a controlled substance, though. It is very narcotic. And when I tell you that all of the struggles I had experiencing, now don't take this the wrong way, everything I had been experiencing leading up to that moment went away. It was for a minute, 1 minute, the magic cure all that would ultimately destroy my life. So after I took that first fear set, and it's like my chemistry had changed. I don't know why it made me feel so different after her as opposed to before her. But I had stockpiles of these pain meds in my cabinets from all of the health and situations. And by the month, I was hardcore addicted. And when I realized I was an addict, my first thought was, I'm just like my birth mother. And I was so fearful of that reality that I couldn't tell anybody. So I didn't. I didn't know any drug dealers. I didn't know how common it was to be addicted to pain medication whatsoever. And the fact of the matter is, I had to come up with a way to suffice my addiction, because before it was over, I was taking up to 50 Norco 10s a day.
Oh
I had what
my.
they call an unexplained tolerance. Um, when I broke, when my brother was born, it's very important that I say my anger towards God, towards Jesus, my doubt and fear of faith, and just pure anger. I turned my back on the Lord. I wanted nothing to do with him. I didn't trust anybody, let alone a God who could let this happen to somebody. And I walked through the darkest days of my life. And I can look back in hindsight and I can see that. I can see it so vividly and clearly now. For the next 8 years, I would leave my husband, lose my family, end up in the most abusive relationship I've ever been in, which was 10 times as abusive as the shooter. I'd be hospitalized. I'd have to have surgeries because of the physical abuse. I'd be homeless. I would lose my career. I'd paralegaled for about 20 years leading up to this. I would become incarcerated. And while I had been picked up a time or two because I figured out this magic way to call in my own prescriptions, which, by the way, you cannot do now. So don't get any ideas if you're struggling, please. It's not possible now like it was once. I would call in 120 every 3 days. I would get caught, and that's why when I would have to like admit to having a problem the first time, nobody can believe it. This isn't you. What has happened? Because nobody knew about any of the stuff except for what was public and advertised. Because all of this time in my life, I had never told anyone any of it. And if I met someone new, they did not know that that life existed, just what I was showing them in person. I was in treatment 5 times, if I can remember. I always say it took me a lot of running starts. But on March 12th, um, 2012, March 7th, 2012, sorry, I just taken my son to the orthodontist. I was still very much leading this double life. And as we were leaving, we were talking about where we were going to go on to lunch. I'd had moments of clean time through those bouts of treatment and such, but I always did things my way. And God
Mm-hmm.
was not part of the equation, even if I said he was.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, I was pulled over by a detective in an unmarked vehicle who recognized my car. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know I was somebody anybody would recognize, except for they had built a case against me, and I had 14 charges in 2 separate counties. I was looking at 8 years in prison, even though I had never been to jail before, and I sat in jail for 4.5 months before the angels amongst us and the Lord worked his magic. I still hadn't given my life to God in these moments, but I prayed a lot and asked, and I was still manipulating and doing all of these crazy things on such a level that I wrote a judge in another county because it was what was keeping me from this program everybody had talked about me doing. Some would say don't do it, it's a setup. Some would say do it, it'll keep you out of prison. And that was really where I just want to get out of prison, whatever. So I wrote this judge and I told him that I needed his help, and he agreed to let me do this program if this particular county I was in would agree concurrently. And that is where, so I sat there 4.5 months. I was released. I went through this drug court program. And in this drug court program, they forced me by threatening me with jail time if I missed an appointment. They forced me to get the help that I needed. And they were bringing in counselors from all over the place, specialized counselors for the different variations of abuse and abandonment and all of the things that I had experienced. It was in that moment, as I walked through these moments of counseling that I had to relive and experience, that I thought I was going to die. I turned to God. And I can't tell you that it was like this magic moment of you're all better, because it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I I made sure that I recognized that I had turned my back on him, and I just decided to do things a little bit different because I'd always done things my way as a survivor. I had a survivor mentality. I was not going to give anybody the option to help me. Nobody, not even God. And when I changed my mindset and recognized that I couldn't do this anymore, and my way was certainly not getting me anywhere good, it just kept getting me in the darkest, deepest, horrific situations. I started to see the light. And from there, my life changed. And I'll have 14 years. And that's just a crazy amount of time for me, but 14 years. And I still have hard days and I still stumble and I still have all of the moments. But the fact of the matter is my life is entirely different because God is a part of my every single day. And I just want to read one. If you are somebody who's experienced hard, if you're somebody who's experienced trauma, if you are somebody who's in an abusive relationship and you've got a survivor mentality, because I really feel like the survivor mentality kept me from my happiness for far too long. I found Romans 8:18, and it's, if you're shaped in survival mentality, it's something to think about. The sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory to be revealed. I did not believe that the life I live today was real. I thought it was all BS, but it is. And I could go on for days and tell you how far I've come. And um, I'm married to a man who wouldn't dream of lifting his hand to me, let alone raise his voice. He loves my children. My children and I have all been through counseling and have beautiful relationships. I got my career back. I have a community. I'm not alone. I never have to be alone again. And the first person I
Amen.
turn to every single day is God. So just remember, and I can look back in my life and see now, as alone as I felt and as lost as I felt, there is no way I ever would have survived any of those moments had he not been standing there right beside me every
Amen.
single moment of every single day. Since I've accepted that and I recognize it and I remember it when things get too hard, nothing is impossible anymore.
No.
And I thank you for listening. I know I probably was all over the place, but
Oh, that's all right, man. You did. Gosh, I'm almost speechless. The power in that. When you turned your life, that moment when you turned back to God, you repented and you turned back to God and asked Him for help, and you described it as you didn't. There was no like lightning bolt or anything like that. I've had felt the same thing when I asked help. It was almost that overwhelming sense of peace that everything was going to be okay. I
mhm,
think that's what we experience, right?
absolutely.
When God steps in and says, okay, this is what I get the chills talking about it. When that Holy Spirit comes back, when, man, that full surrender, there's no way to describe it, but that peace.
And you will start to see the changes. I mean, I did not like the lightning bolt moment is I remember asking people when I was struggling and suffering and praying to die on a daily basis, how did you do it? Like just give me this magic. I wanted the formula. And there was no formula.
Oh,
And the fact of the matter is some of them would tell me it was God. And I would just be like, well, he's not done it for me, but have you let him? Have you let him do
yeah.
it? Because
Amen.
that's the problem.
Amen.
That's the problem.
Trust. When
Yes.
they say turn your life and your will to the care of something, to the care of God, it's easy to pray for things, but it's hard to trust.
Oh,
It's hard to
so
trust that's going to happen, right? and
It
believe. I mean,
is,
once
and
you start
especially
trusting
when you're
God,
controlling everything in your life in
yeah,
such a way that if you
yeah,
just let go of one thing, you might fall apart. Well,
right.
that's what he's for. Just toss it to him because holding on to it isn't doing you any good. It's
No,
just not.
agreed. Well, Kelly, wow, I'm speechless. What an amazing story. Keep telling that story. You're going to change and save lives. Uh,
Thank you.
come join us at BYO some night, Saturday night, 6 o'clock. Man, we got some amazing women that would love, you'd be a perfect fit with our group. So
Thank
God bless
you.
you, girl. Thank you so much
You
for being
too.
here. Go do two things. Love God, love others. Bye, guys.
Yes. Bye.